This episode of the Policing Matters podcast is brought to you by LVT, the mobile surveillance solution trusted by public sector leaders nationwide. See how LVT's self-powered units protect communities, secure critical infrastructure, and support law enforcement operations at lvt.com. Hey, welcome back to Policing Matters on policeone.com. I'm your host, Jim Dudley. Today, we're diving into a topic that often stays behind the scenes: the families and loved ones who stand beside our police officers every single day. The spouses, the kids, the parents, the ones who feel the ripple effects of the badge in ways most people never see. Well, my guest today knows that world firsthand. Katherine Boyle is an advocate and speaker for law enforcement, kids, and families. As the daughter of a Philadelphia Police Department lieutenant, she brings both heart and hard-earned insight into what it's really like growing up in a law enforcement household. She's also the host of the powerful podcast Beyond the Uniform with the Lieutenant's Daughter, where she's on a mission to shine a light on the challenges and strengths of public safety families and to help officers be more connected, more present, and more supported both on and off duty. Well, I know you as the Lieutenant's Daughter. Welcome, Katherine Boyle.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm so excited for this conversation.
Yeah, I've been following you for a while now on Instagram, mainly. It's so great and encouraging to see your supporting posts. And I think it gives, I think law enforcement professionals, it gives them encouragement. And I think it's also informative to those who may not know anyone personally in law enforcement, gives them a different sense and perspective. Um, How'd you get there? How'd you get to being the lieutenant's daughter and showing up on social media and with your website?
Yeah, I mean, almost like a happy accident at this point. But I'm so glad that it kind of manifested the way that it did. It's also funny, like who refers to it as who reads it LT versus who says lieutenant. It's really funny. Usually it's people with insight into the police world who translate it into lieutenant, but a lot of people don't even know what LT stands for unless they're kind of in it. So it's just something that I've observed who says LT versus who actually
Oh,
translates it. Um, but yeah, so as you mentioned, kind of touched on, I'm very much a civilian, and I feel very lucky and grateful that I do sort of attract other civilians and that I can give some sort of insight to people who have no exposure to this profession. Um, but and that's kind of what started it all. So back in 2020, I was living in New York City. And my background is actually in fashion and in fitness. So I had a lot of people in my home city at the time participating in the riots. And they were actually challenging me because my dad was a retired police officer, and they were asking me to explain the actions of police officers. They were sending me photos and videos and just all kinds of stuff from the civil unrest that was going on. And I remember one of my dearest friends, once upon a time, he was sending me videos and he was saying, why is this police officer talking to us this way? Why is he treating us this way? X, Y, and Z. And they were out past curfew. The police officer was trying to get them to go home. And I all I could think was he's doing his job and you're staying out past curfew. He would probably give anything to go home right now, and you're blatantly refusing to go home, and he's probably been working for 72. Like it just was not computing in my head. And then it kind of had like this trickle down effect on me where I was like, okay, but also how is that police officer supposed to go home after what he's doing and experiencing at these riots? And how is he supposed to put his kids to bed or, kiss his wife goodnight? And that's kind of what really spiraled my thoughts and what made me realize like my perspective, again, very much a civilian, do not have what it takes to be a police officer. Never really thought about the fact that my dad was a cop a whole lot. Um, but clearly I had a different perspective and different insight than my friends at the time had. And I was like, I have to do something. I have to support them in some capacity. I think that it could be really powerful if they know that there are civilians out there, especially back in 2020. Like nobody was, really speaking up on their behalf. And so I was trying to figure out what I could do to support. And here we are. I interviewed police officers to see what that could look like. And it's kept coming back to my relationship with my dad, how present my dad was with us, how involved he was in our lives. And that's when I really realized, like, oh, there's even more here. Like, I didn't realize, and we can get into this, but I didn't realize that sometimes law enforcement officers don't know how to go home and connect with their kids or give the kids the love and the affection that they do require. And so I was like, well, this is a whole nother tumbleweed that we need to address. And so that's kind of how it all started.
Yeah, no, I mean, you bring up a lot there, and I think, what you might be referring to is that, police officers see a lot of trauma and hear about vicarious trauma. They're talking to victims, and it's really hard to go home and de-escalate ourselves, decompress, and then grab your kids and pick them up. Sometimes that's the first thing you want to do, right?
Hmm.
Or kiss your wife or husband or your loved ones. But sometimes it's really hard to make that transition from, really being heightened, from protests and people screaming in your face or throwing stuff at you. And then you go home and, you're still a little bit jittery. We often talk about those pressures that officers face, but not so much about what it means for families. What was it like growing up in your house? I mean, it sounds like your dad may not have fit the norm, but was in being present and taking the time to be a part of your lives. I mean, we hear so often about cops who they're working so much or so much overtime that they're, when they are home, they're sleeping or they're watching TV or they're playing golf or doing something to get away from the job. How'd you know that your life with your dad was a little bit different?
Yeah, I didn't until I started on this kind of journey. Um, but you're right. And that's why I feel so strongly, and that's why I feel so empowered to share my experience and share about my dad and about what we did, because it really is the proof is in the pudding for him. You can have an excellent career. You can make a name for yourself and a legacy for yourself as a police officer while also taking care of your family and building that legacy and, passing on your values and your principles to your own kids. And that's really what I want to share, is that it doesn't have to be one or the other. It can be both. And for us, we were really lucky. I was really lucky. My dad really did sort of have his head on straight. He was 31 when he became a police officer, so I think he really went into it with a different mindset, a different a different head on his shoulders than a lot of these young people who get on at 21, 22 years old, no family, no family on the horizon, still figuring out who the heck they are. And again, my dad just went into it with a different mindset and mentality, and we felt that. And it was, we had a wonderful childhood even before I started all of this. Um, Way back when, I used to describe our upbringing as Beaver Cleaver, and I knew that when if and when the time came that I was going to get married and have kids, I always said, and I'm telling you, I said this as a young person, I want to do it the way my parents did it. And I just think that that speaks volumes about the way they raised their family, their dedication and their devotion to each other and to their family. And then again, when you layer in the fact that he was a police officer in Philadelphia, no less, in Special Victims Unit. There's a lot there, and I want people to understand that it is possible. It's not necessarily easy, and more often than not, they're not given the proper tools, but hopefully, that's what I'm here for.
Yeah, well, absolutely. What a great tribute to your parents, right? That you model yourself after them. We always talk about communication being the key. My own two sons are adults, they're sergeants with my old department. And I remember having to tell them sometimes that I couldn't go to their school events or, I coached Little League and soccer and a little bit of basketball for probably more than 10 years between my two sons. But there was a point where I was getting called off of a field to go back into work for a critical event or something else like that. And I don't remember the communication aspect or what was said. How did your dad handle that in explaining to you that there were some concerns at work that needed to take him away from family? Maybe he promised to take you on an outing and had to cancel last minute. Do you remember those conversations?
Yeah, and not super. I mean, I remember a few off the top of my head. I think what was really important and what I remember reflecting back is that, Dad had to work. Something important at work came up that he had to see to. And for us, it was never like dad's a police officer and police work is calling him. It was just dad has work. And I mean, same thing if your dad is a nurse, if your dad is a doctor, a construction, like sometimes things come up and it wasn't so much about, we're a first responder family, so we have to make sacrifices. It
Mm.
wasn't about that. It was just like something came up and dad has to work and, we'll make it up to you or we've got something else planned in a couple of weeks, we'll spend that time together or whatever it was. And then I think the other thing too was we knew that sometimes those things were going to happen. Like sometimes there was going to be overtime because there was a case that he was really involved in or what have you. And so he was really mindful about that, and he wouldn't opt into overtime or working extra because he would kind of reserve that for when it was required, because he knew it was inevitable. There are going to be times where I'm pulled away and I am going to have to explain it to them. So why, put myself in the position to go away and to work extra? So I think that
Mhm.
that really sort of balanced things out a little bit. And then when we were young, he missed more things than when we got older, the recitals and things like that. And in those moments, there was it was almost like a plan. It was like, okay, dad can't come to this, but aunt so and so are going to come instead. So it was like,
Mm.
how lucky are we? We like dad can't come because he has work. Okay, fine, but Aunt so and so is going to come and like that's really exciting and that's fun in its own right. So I think just sort of having that backup plan and that reframe for kids can really go a long way.
Yeah, no, that's a great strategy. And I've always thought that take your kid to work day was
Hmm.
just impossible, right? Nobody's taking their
Hmm.
kid in uniform to their place of business, guns and canines and drunks screaming from,
Yeah.
the booking
Yep.
counter. Did you ever have a chance to visit your dad's station or headquarters and get that glimpse of what it was like at his work?
Yeah, it's so funny you mention that because this is something that I remember deeply. And again, it's something that I would sort of reflect on before I started this endeavor because it just kind of stands out to me. It stood out to me as a kid and then as an adult. When I was growing up, it was take your daughter to work day. So boys actually didn't participate. And I say that because it was almost more special because it was like an opportunity for girls to connect with their dads. And girls would miss a day of school or a half day of school. Like they would be out of school for this day. And we couldn't do it. We couldn't participate. My parents wouldn't let us, obviously, for all of the reasons and more you mentioned. Um, So I remember I would be really bummed. Like, I'm the only girl in class today. Like, what the heck? This is nonsense. But what my parents would do was they would arrange for a Saturday or a Sunday morning. My dad would go and pick up his check in person, and he would take us with him. And he would take my brother too. So it would be like a little outing. It would be a weekend morning where he kind of could figure it was maybe going to be a little bit slower than usual. And he could kind of, control the environment a little bit more. He knew who would be working. He would just kind of have a better lay of the land. And it was sort of their way of making it up to us. Like, no, you can't participate in take your daughter to work day. It's dad's work is not really a place for kids, but we're gonna go on our own outing to work in a week or two. And that's kind of how they made it up to us. And it's always stood out to me. And it was always
Yeah,
extra special too, because it was like, oh, the LT or Mike is coming in with his kids. Like, people would like make a fuss over us.
yeah, yeah. And you didn't have the crowd. You didn't have to move
Yeah.
along with the herd, right?
Yeah.
So before we talk about adult families and officers, let's take a quick moment and thank our sponsor. LVT's solar powered mobile surveillance units put eyes and AI analytics where fixed cameras can't: parking lots, remote borders, disaster zones, and large events. Agencies using LVT have seen up to an 83% drop in parking lot incidents and a 54% reduction in burglaries. Each unit is rapid to deploy, cloud connected via cellular or satellite, and secured end to end so your team can monitor and respond in real time with fewer resources. Put LVT to test at your toughest location. Schedule a free trial today at lvt.com. Welcome back. And I'm here with Katherine Boyle, host of Beyond the Uniform with the LT's daughter. I got it right. So I don't know. I mean, it's funny that you mentioned that at the beginning. I see LT, I immediately think lieutenant.
Yeah, your
So
brain like switches, like your brain automatically goes. I know.
yeah, so here you are, the LT's daughter. Pardon me.
Lieutenant
Cat
works too.
or lieutenant. Yeah, those in the know. If you know, you know. Catherine, a big part of your work is helping families have those difficult but necessary conversations. When you were young or even as a teen, did you feel fear or anxiety when your dad went to work? Did you think, oh my gosh, he's a cop? There's awful thing. I've seen some news reports recently. What should parents say to their kids, or should they even discuss it? I mean, you talked about it a minute ago and said, "Hey, it was like anything else, right? Like a surgeon's not going to say, I'm going to go in a guy's brain today. Wish me
Mhm.
luck." What do you say? What's that conversation like?
Yeah, so for us it was like I said, it was very much just dad's going to work. The details and the nitty-gritty were between him and my mom. And I know now, my mom had her own experience, especially when he was on night work and things like that. But for us, or I should say for me especially, it we didn't live in fear. We didn't necessarily understand or know that or think that dad was in danger all the time or anything to that effect. But I do think conversations are important. And that's something that I talk a lot about because kids, especially kids who have parents that are, on the beat or on patrol or what have you, and they might be coming home, you know, must or I talked to a gentleman a few weeks ago. One day he came home covered in someone else's blood and his kids saw him, so like I think those conversations are very important, especially for kids who are going to be exposed to it. And the thing is, it can be scary, but I think kids can work with knowledge and information. If they just have nothing, if they're not given anything to work with, they're going to make up their own stuff. They're going to draw the lines in their own little brains, and you don't know what that's going to look like.
Right.
And one example I give because it's so it's so silly almost. You know, we talked about how my upbringing was a positive one. We had a great relationship. You know, we weren't living in fear or anything like that. But I do remember when I was very young and my dad would go to court, you know, he would be working a different schedule, like he'd be leaving the house at a different time than usual. He'd be wearing different clothes than normal. And it would be like, oh, what's going on? Oh, dad has court today. That's it. All right, see you, dad. And you don't think about that, especially as an adult who understands and knows what that means. But for me, as a young kid, I don't know what that means. And so I'm trying to reverse engineer in my own brain, like, why is dad going to court? Who goes to court? Let me think about what I've learned on TV, what I've seen on Judge Judy. Bad guys go to court. And then so that, like all of these little dots that I'm connecting backwards, I come to the conclusion, like, is dad in trouble? Is dad going to court because he's in trouble?
Hmm.
And so I use that as like a very, again, almost silly example, but it's like that's how kids' brains kind of operate. They need things to make sense. And if the adults or the people in charge in their lives aren't helping with that, then they're going to come up with their own answers and you're going to have no say with what they come up with and how that's going to affect them.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you make me think about a time I was the captain in our child abuse unit, and it was tough, man. I was coming home, and I was so grateful to see my kids, but my little guy uh, refused to brush his teeth. So I remember one time holding him in a headlock, trying to brush his teeth for him. And he's screaming and yelling and says, I'm calling 911 and reporting you for child abusion.
Oh no.
And I stopped and I thought, wow, they are listening, right? They are hearing what's going on. I don't, talk business at the table, but they must have heard it from somewhere. And it just
Hmm.
caused me to sort of pause. It was funny too, but um, yeah, it made me think that they are listening. They're taking cues, verbal, nonverbal cues.
Yeah.
And like you say, they're filling in the blanks. So if you don't tell them, they're going to figure it out themselves or a version maybe that you don't want them to think about.
Yeah, and what I always say too is they observe and they absorb. So like it's also the energy and you know it's a very trendy word right now, the vibe is also very important. And if mom or dad or whoever is always nervous or scared or freaked out or you know pissed off, like they feel that and they're going to feed off of that. And so again, these conversations are just so important. Age
Hmm.
appropriate, of course.
Yeah, of course. And speaking of age appropriate, let's lighten it up a minute. So, any awkward or funny moments that you can recall that were awkward or unusual because your dad was a cop?
Oh, I don't think so. I don't know.
Never came home
Um,
tipsy or got a ride home that you didn't ask for?
no, I didn't drink growing up. I was kind of a little goody two-shoes, if I'm being honest.
Nice.
Um, but no, I'm pretty boring, I think, if I'm honest.
Okay, so nobody made fun of you because your dad was a cop or said something
No,
untoward.
we grew up in the 90s and the 2000s and it was just so different and I
Hmm.
and I recognize that and I think that that's really important to kind of distinguish. We grew up
Yeah.
in a time where people supported the police more often than not. And in my neighborhood specifically, everybody knew who our family was because the babysitters or the parents or you know the kids would come to our house if something was awry or something was wrong or
Hmm.
there was an emergency. They knew like the Boyles will know what to do because Mr. Boyle is a police officer. So I remember like if there was a fight in the neighborhood, the kids in the house would come and my dad would be the one to go take care of business. Um and I just think that's something that's different in today's society where I mean I'm hearing about kids lie pretending their dad or their mom does a job different from what they really do or you know just blatantly hiding the fact that they have police officers in the family which just breaks my heart to a whole nother degree because that is just not what I what I knew.
Yeah, I mean, it is a different time indeed. And I mean, I've been through all those phases and the back and forth about pro police, anti police. My sons, I told you, they're both sergeants and they are fiercely protective of their family on social media. And so while all my friends are posting pictures of their kids or their grandkids now, we worry about things like doxing and personal attacks. I don't want to show pictures of my grandkids with like a happy face where their face should be. You
Hmm.
know, that's no good either.
Yeah.
Any advice on social media exposure? I totally respect their wishes. I don't post pictures of them or their kids, but for me, it's really tough. I'd love to celebrate them, but I can't.
Yeah, and I mean I can't imagine that because it's like you want to share things. That's kind of what we do now in the social media world. But I think personally, I don't think it's worth it.
Mm,
Um, if and when I have kids, my plan is to not put them on social media because I think, you just hear about a lot of horror stories where people steal the images. I follow one woman, her kids, someone pretended to be her and stole her kids' images, and now with AI, it's like it's just so and I'm not one of those people who is like, the world is a bad place and you got to protect everyone at all costs. But I do think that the internet is a scary place
mm.
and a very unknown world, especially to, your average Joe. And I just don't think it's worth it. I don't think it's worth it to put them at risk, put their safety at risk. And then too, they are people. They're young people who should have their own say, in my opinion, on whether or
Mm.
not they are going to be on social media. And if they're not old enough to understand the scope of what exactly that means, then I personally don't think they're old enough to, have their face on social media. But that's just my kind of 2 cents. Everybody kind of has to do, what's right for them. But I just sometimes I wish I wasn't on social media. It's just such a scary place.
Yeah, no, I hear you. I am out there, and if anybody wants to come to my house, they know where I live. I hear what you're saying, and I appreciate that. And I want to wrap up. I have one more thing I'd like to ask you, but first, I want to say that our mutual friend Abby Ellsworth, she was on the show a couple of weeks ago, and she's terrific. A civilian advocate of policing. I love what you're doing. The message that the two of you put out there feels so supportive, and I think cops really need to hear that there are people out there. I mean, you've got a relationship. You've got a dad who was in policing, and so you've got, all that inside baseball as well. But, a lot of times they retire and you could just easily walk away and say, wow, we got out of that one, right? But you're really going the extra mile. And like Abby, I appreciate what you're doing, and I just want to thank you.
Thank you. Abby's wonderful.
Yeah. Hey, before we wrap up, I know that a lot of our listeners are married or they're dating someone in public safety. What's your best advice for couples just starting out in the journey?
The biggest thing is communication and patience, I would say. You have to communicate. Uh, you know, as uncomfortable as it might be, as difficult as it might be, communication is so crucial. And that doesn't necessarily mean you have to, if you are the police officer or the person in the academy, you don't have to go into the nitty-gritty or talk about details that you're not comfortable sharing, but you do have to be able to open up to your other person because they want to be there for you. That's half their purpose in life is to be there for their person. And withholding that from them is doing both of you a disservice. And then being patient with one another, I think, is just huge. It's going to be a curveball for everyone involved. But at the end of the day, you're on the same team and you want the same things. So be patient with the process, be patient with one another, and be open to sharing and going through it together, not separately.
Yeah, that's great advice. And I think, as a parent, when my kids were little, I learned to, keep it down and not talk about work at the dinner table or, in settings unless they were asking for, some clarification. We went over all the gun safety things as
Mhm.
well, right? Like, here's a gun, and God forbid if you ever see it laying around at our house or anybody else's house, these are the safety things to keep in mind. Go tell an adult, those kinds of things.
Yep.
But yeah, I mean, to have that filter and be mindful that they're around, and even if they're nearby, they're listening or they're seeing, they're watching. Katherine Boyle, Beyond the Uniform with the LT's daughter. Thank you so much for sharing your insights and your passion with us today. I appreciate what you're doing.
Thank you so much for having me. This was great. Thank you.
Yeah, you bet. And of course, to those not in the know, the LT stands for lieutenant, the lieutenant's daughter. Yeah, Philadelphia, man, tough place to be a cop. Hey, listeners, be sure to check out her website at beyondtheuniform.co for resources, stories, and support. She's got a lot of great information there. And drop me a line. Let me know what you think about today's show. Drop me an email at policing matters at police1.com and let me know what you think. If you've got anything for Katherine, I'll be happy to pass it on, or you can just go to her website and tell her yourself. All right. Well, thanks for listening. I hope you're staying well, taking good care of yourself, and I hope to talk to you again real soon.